Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider. This is Stereo Niche. Hey, this week, something completely new. It's called the Collector Series. Stick around. Well, thanks for sticking around because I think you will very much enjoy this video. I'm a collector. I've been sharing my passion for collecting and some of my collection over the past year in my videos. But I also enjoy meeting other collectors and hearing their stories and what they collect and what drives them. It's been something I've always sought out other collectors for my whole life, and it's sort of meeting your kind, if you will, and understanding that they have something that is really driving. It's a passion, it's a hobby. It gets them excited, and I always have enjoyed hearing their story, and I think you will too. So I thought I would create this series, which is to focus only on the collector, by the way. I'm not going to be in front of the camera, or at least I don't intend to be, because I want them to share with you their passion for their hobby and their collection. So that is the series. If you are a collector and you would like me to do a video on your collection, reach out. I'd love to talk to you about it, and maybe we can figure out how to get something together. If I can't visit you, maybe we'll figure out a way to do it. But in this particular video, I'm going to introduce you to Julian Burke. Julian is a person I met a year ago at a ham fest, and I did a video of a ham fest not long ago. A ham fest is a wonderful gathering of audio and, electronic enthusiasts. I'll say it's mostly around ham radio, but all sorts of interests are there. And I met Julian at that event, and we got to talking, and Julian shares with me that he's a collector, and one thing leads to another, and Julian says, you should come over and see my collection someday. Well, it took me a little over a year, but I finally made it over there. Julian lives in the Tennessee area, and so I spent a whole day with Julian, and I can tell you that the phrase "just scratch the surface," that doesn't actually even come close to describing that. I only saw a very, 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 very tiny amount of his collection, to say the least. But it would take months, if not years, to probably go through and see everything. When he says that he wants to put together a museum, it's not a future state, it's what he could do today. He already has the quality of the collection, and the volume of the collection is already there to put a museum together. It's quite impressive. But I think you'll enjoy it. Julian is a fantastic storyteller, so I think he says it all best. So let's get to the video, and let me introduce you to Julian.
My name is Julian Burke. I was born in Washington, D.C. I collect stuff. It's my museum. And I've been electronics all my life. I knew engineers. I went to school to study for my first class FCC license. I'm a ham radio operator. I have broadcasting license. I'm first class license with endorsements that I have radio or television as an engineer. And I can fix pretty much everything, and as you will get to see shortly here, some of my collection that I've accumulated over the last 50 years. My dad was in the government, as everybody was in Arlington, Virginia, and then my dad was transferred to Seattle, Washington. Our house was on Prospect Street, and it overlooked Puget Sound, Mount Rainier, and the World's Fair. And during the World's Fair there, I made friends with a guy at the gate, and he'd let me in the World's Fair, free of charge. And I'd always go to the telephone exhibit. Well, they had a booth where you could see yourself on color TV. And I looked at that big, massive, it was a RCA TK41, and it just fascinated me that I just had to have one of those someday. But me, how could I have afforded, a $70,000 camera? This is like 60 years ago. Well, Anyway, living on Queen Anne Hill, all three networks were up there, the transmitter sites. You had Cairo Television, which had not only television in their own building with a tower, they had a radio station directly across the street. And then you had Como Television, which was Channel 4, and they had a transmitter site. And then there was King Television, and they had their transmitter site there, and it was just blocks from where I lived. After school every day, I could stop at King Television, and this is back when they'd let a 10, 11-year-old boy in there. They can't do this anymore. And these are real live transmitter things, and everything fascinated me. In 1963, we were transferred here to Knoxville, Tennessee. I could go to WIVK, their studios were up on Beard, and I could actually walk to there, and I remember the broadcast engineer there, and he'd teach me things, and I just started doing stuff. It wasn't long after that I went into the Army. I was going to be drafted, so I enlisted to beat the draft because I wanted to get into radio or something. And I ended up in the Signal Corps, and I went to Instructional Methods Division. I earned my instructor's badge, and I became an instructor in radar, and I taught for the rest of the time in the Army. My first radio that I collected was an Atwater Kent 85, and I restored it, and then I'd find radios, and then I learned that there are meets, you know, like Hamfest, and the radio like Kutztown, and back then there was Canandaigua, New York, and other friends of mine that I'd met that knew about these goings on, that I started going to them, and I'd find radios and stuff that interested me, and it's still going on. And I still go to these meets like Kutztown. You can always find something there that you didn't know that you wanted, but you had to have. And here it is. Possibly, but I can't think of anything. That's a hard question to answer. And I'm sure there's lots of things that I don't have that I would really want. But as I've said before, it kind of reminds me, if you walk into an antique store, you know, you're just killing time. And the person that waits on you, they always ask the same question. Are you looking for anything in particular? And I always answer that question with, always. I don't know, but when I see it and it relates to radio or TV, I have to have it. And I'm sure there's stuff that I could think of, but I have a pretty good collection that covers pretty much every phase of broadcasting from day one, from the early 20s to the present day. But my collection kind of stops at around 1970, because there's a lot of stuff after that. It's just, you can still find it, it's common as flies, and I'm not really interested. But what I'm interested in is the history. What I have here, there's an amplifier made by Western Electric with early vacuum tubes in it, that they learned that when you would put voltages on the control grid itself, it would control the flow of current through the tube. And this is how they developed amplifiers. And now, instead of headphones on a crystal set, you could put speakers on it and you could hear voltage. But long before tubes came along, you had crystal sets. Crystal radios came in many, many, many variations. Some were interesting. They call this the Martian. There were 3 versions of it here, but it has a cat whisker on it here, and you put your headphones on it. You had an antenna and a ground. And you could actually use this and tune in a station there. And this is before tubes came along, that you could listen to radio in a crystal set. And crystal sets, they stayed around for many years, and back in the 50s, 60s, and perhaps the 70s, all your comic books had little crystal sets advertised. You could, for $1.99, you could get a little rocket-shaped crystal set. And when you were a boy growing up in the 50s or 60s, they would advertise these rocket radios. They had looked like an antenna on the top, but it was a loop stick there, and it had a diode in it. And you could listen to the radio when you clipped one to your switch plate or some ground item or something, and you could actually receive a strong transmitter. This is from about 1921, 1922. And this is a Federal Junior there that you could, this is an early radio. This is before tubes came around.
And this was made to use with headset?
This is made to use with a headset. You couldn't hook a loudspeaker to it. There wasn't enough voltage there to power a loudspeaker there. This is an original.
In the box.
I drove to Chattanooga for this.
Really?
Yeah, it was a estate sale. And they showed pictures, and I saw, oh, that box. You know, and the crystal set that they had was in real bad shape, but I didn't care. I wanted the box. You know, it's in mint condition, a Fillmore radio. This is from like 1922. Back in the days in your comic books, besides crystal radios, you would see microphones for sale. This one is the Little Wonder microphone. Many manufacturers made similar ones, and these were made to hook up to your tube radio, you know, like a cathedral radio. And it'd say, be your own broadcaster. Put your own voice on your own radio. And when you'd open it up, it would have wires in there, and it would show the kids how to pull an audio tube out and put these little spade lugs on each lug on it and plug the tube back in. Now, can you imagine the liability of something today? Significant microphones, you have these Western Electric microphones. These are W1s. These are carbon, they call them double carbon button microphones. It's interesting, it's hard to tell where they originally came from. Here is a condenser microphone. It's an RCA4A. This came from JBS, which is in San Francisco. A lot of these microphones are probably from all over the country and for various applications. But microphones evolved from telephone. Remember when Alexander Graham Bell invented the microphone, he was thinking of telephones. And all telephones had a carbon microphone because it put a voltage on the circuit, and it'd have carbon granules that would vibrate and modulate your current going through it. So many of these styles, the earlier ones, are in the fashion of telephones. And they even had telephones that were made to be microphones for a radio station back then, as the microphones were evolving. This one is I believe, a German or a French microphone. This is for movie production. It's actually a rivet microphone with some big magnets in it. And then some of the early broadcast mics, you had these Western Electric, they call them 8-balls. And these were for professional. And there's a matching set of them down there for broadcast use. And then you had other items. And then getting a little ahead of ourselves, if you look back here, they had what they call monkey poo transmitters. During the days of Vietnam, they would drop these things in the forest and it looked like monkey poop. But what they were was a little transmitter with a microphone, and they could detect troop movement. You know, there's various things for stuff like that. And of course, me being in the Signal Corps, I like things like Signal Corps. Here's an early 1950 auto tag there for Fort Monmouth, 1950. And other items, I have captured Japanese stuff that were captured during World War II. These were tuning coils in Japanese, and I have another Japanese set in here, down here at the bottom. That was a transmitter, a receiver for a Japanese thing back. This, I believe, goes back to maybe World War I, and it has a telegraph key on it. But there's just, radio had many, many, many applications back then. And from everything from comedy to home use to military use, radio had a play in it.
So you've got a RCA, something on the air.
Oh, and every studio would have an on the air sign. I have many of them. There's one here and one there. In a radio booth, when they would, radio was a serious business back then. Everything had to be quiet. They didn't need two people yakking in the hallway and stuff. And when that light was on, that meant do not enter this booth, period. NBC affiliates, remember they had, you see the initials NBC, it's the notes GEC. Some people say it stood for the General Electric Corporation because GE and RCA were one entity before they became really RCA. And a lot of times on YouTube you can see some early broadcasts and the guy's using one of these. I'll show you something even better than that. But these are original things that the NBC affiliates would use. The real NBC chimes, they only made 4 of those. They were for the time frames, you know, like the East Coast, West Coast. But the real set of NBC chimes that were invented were electromechanical. They had a rotary thing there, and when you hear that NBC, it was all mechanically done. It was a rack mount thing that was said NBC on it. I think one of them still exists, but boy, I sure would like to have been around the dumpster when they tossed those things.
One of those items you'd like to have.
Oh, now that's an item I'd like to have. That's number 1 on my list. If I could find an original NBC chime, and it was electromechanical. You'd push a button and it'd go NBC. And there's another chime that people don't know about. There's a book out called The Fourth Chime. NBC would go NBC. Now, there was a 4th chime that when the 4th chime would sound, this would alert all of the agencies that we've had an emergency. There's been a bombing somewhere. This is during World War II. That the 4th chime, when it was sounded, everybody in the studio, like New York or anywhere around, something's going on. It's an emergency, and it's something to do with a war effort. But it's called the 4th chime.
Wow.
Fact. These are some of my collection of early radios. Here's an original Ware set using these 199 tubes in it. It's used with headphones. And most of the early it's a battery set, like most of them were in the early 20s. And the tubes were always exposed, and there's a reason for that. Because being a battery operated radio, it has a voltage control on it. This adjusts the filament voltage that they would have like a car battery. And Saturday morning they'd bring their battery in to be charged, paid 15 cents or a quarter to recharge it. Then they could listen to the Tennessee Barn Dance Saturday night. But when they would tune it up, every time these tubes would light up, they would have a certain type of an orange glow. Anybody that knows tubes, they have an orange glow to them. And because of the strength of the battery, you couldn't put too little voltage on them. You could not put too much voltage on it. Too much voltage, especially filament voltage, you could burn the tube out. Tubes were expensive back then. They were like almost $2. And that was the average salary of most people in the early 20s. But anyway, they would watch the type of glow that it would have, and they could adjust their filament. Now, as the week would wear on, the battery would, of course, degrade, and you'd have to turn the voltage up on the filament a little stronger. That when they'd bring a freshly charged battery back, the first thing you want to do is turn this rheostat way down there, and then bring it up to the proper orange glow that you want. Too little voltage, it'll be weak and distorted. Too much voltage, it'll be strong and distorted. You know, you can't put too much filament voltage on it. If you look at most battery sets, like this one, the tubes are exposed. And the tubes that were not exposed, you had these little windows right here. These little screen windows right there, and then you look at that through there. And then the ones that didn't have the windows or the tubes exposed, this lid on this radio would raise up, and you could look at your tubes in it when you raise the lid on it and look at your tubes. And every one would have, says voltage. There's your rheostat to adjust the filament voltage. You had 3 things to tune. Here's some more Western Electric microphones there. These are double button carbon microphones. And later on, after you got out of your battery sets, then they started inventing cathedral radios. And this is getting into styles, that they're wanting something that women could use. You had style. And really how the cathedral radios were invented, is it a style? Well, yes it is. And it was a popular style. But anytime you have manufacturing, there's 3 words: better, faster, cheaper. And not necessarily in that order. This was a real common microphone back in the 40s, and they used them up, and some people and these are highly sought after today for recording studios. But this is an RCA 77DX. In the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, you saw these on every TV show. This particular one, WROK, that's in Rockford, Illinois. This next one here is an RCA-2A. This is actually a movie microphone for, you know, regular Hollywood movies. That's what it was designed for. But all of your big recording studios use these. This particular microphone still has a Warner Brothers property tag on it. It belonged to Warner Brothers. What did Warner Brothers do? This particular one was used by Mel Blanc. And if you look at pictures that are on the internet with Mel Blanc with one, you will see this microphone. Although they didn't make but about, I think, 500 of those maybe. And these were rather expensive back then, and they were used on booms for producing Hollywood movies in the studio. They weren't designed for outdoor use, you know, because of wind and such. And then they came out with microphones that were 74Bs. Here's a group of them. They're microphones. They call them a Junior 44, but it's a 74B. These were good microphones. They had the same motor action that a 77 uses. I always like these because, boy, they make your voice sound really good, and they're extremely transparent.
What's this this HUZ? Is this sort of like a radio station?
Yes, of course. In Canada, your radio stations begin with C, just like here in this country we have K's and W's here for East Coast, West Coast. HUZ, I think, is a Mexican station, and it's just a microphone that came from across the border. And in Canada, you have call letters that begin with a C, you know, up in Canadian territories.
It's a rather big Magnavox.
And when radios were coming along with speakers, instead of cone speakers, they had horns. And the driver in it was very similar to that's what's on a headphone. And it would be driven with power, with a tube, by the way. And that one was used for public address systems. And there's one to the right that says Magnavox on it. That was a more home type speaker. And horn speakers, there were hundreds of manufacturers that made those back then. And you've got one right there in the front, right there, a little horn. And I've got another interesting one that's made out of brass up here. It's a Wurlitzer, by the way. In 1939, Powell Crosley went out to buy a radio for his son. And he couldn't understand why radios cost so much. He said, well, I can do better. And of course, Crosley made everything. They made automobiles, they made kitchen cabinets and stuff. But in radio, they had and invented what they called a Crosley pup. The Crosley pup, the moniker for it, was a little character that was a comic strip guy called Bonzo. And anyway, they made, I'll show you a real Crosley pup here. But what it was, this is a Crosley pup that I keep. Had a WD-11 tube in it. And this is what he built that he could sell and make money with it, and it was affordable back then. It's just a one tube set. Yeah, these are hard to find. This was an original Bonzo from the cartoon character. This one wasn't necessarily used in their advertising, but this is what they used as a moniker for the Crosley pup. I do have a real cute little character.
Headphones on and everything.
Headphones on. And they did make a larger one that would have, that you could put a real set of headphones on it.
Oh, really?
Haven't found one of those yet, but I'm still looking for one of those.
One of those?
There's one of those that I'm looking for.
All right.
This was from a famous painting. The guy painted a dog listening to a wind-up phonograph, you know,
Yes,
with
I
a
remember.
cylinder. And he entitled it His Master's Voice. And the dog heard his master's voice on this thing. And back then, RCA in England and stuff, when they were coming up, they bought the Victor Corporation. And that's when it became RCA Victor. But anyway, Victor, you know, they had the dog, and its name was Nipper. Then they used this as a moniker, just like the Crosley pup. And when you'd see an RCA advertisement there, it would have Nipper the dog in it, listening to a speaker.
Did you acquire this piece?
Some years ago, with a TV interview that I did, a lady called me and said that her husband took care of all of the television sets during the 1964 World's Fair at the fairgrounds. They had TV sets, and RCA had a large presence there. And see yourself on TV. Now, this is 1964. And he took care of all of the RCA products that were up there to make sure everything was working. She didn't say exactly what he had, but it took me a little while to get over there, but I was amazed. He had one of these and he sold it to me. I found another one that came from a store here in Knoxville, and just by accident a friend of mine said that, oh, a store that existed, they have an RCA dog, would you be interested? Is this a trick question? Of course I am. So I have two of them. They're hard to find because these were dealer items. The original ones were made out of paper mache. Finding one of those, they're usually extremely poor or they don't exist. But if you find one that's in mint condition, they're extremely valuable. They want one. But anyway, it's just another moniker that advertises RCA.
Right.
One of my favorite things that I like is their early advertising. When you listened to radio back then, of course, there were advertisers for everything from Alka-Seltzer to Ipana toothpaste, you name it. Here's something that I'm especially proud of in my collecting. I have never seen one before, and I've never seen one after, and as far as I know, this could be the only one left. This is a grocery store advertising piece for Johnson's Paste Wax. And this is Fibber, McGee, and Molly. Now you have to realize, television had not come in now. Everybody was glued to their radio for entertainment. And you'd listen to Fibber, McGee, and Molly. And this is their new time, Tuesday night. This particular piece, if you notice down here, the original grocery store baskets had handlebars on them like a bicycle instead of the bar.
That's a grocery store basket.
That's a grocery store basket. This display was meant to go in the back of a basket. The basket would be full of Johnson's Paste Wax products. And here you are, folks, the famous Johnson's Wax Polishes. And it polishes, it cleans, it whatever, you know, and in their radio programs, you'd hear them say, she'd say, oh, I've got to clean the kitchen up. Well, Molly, use Johnson's Paste Wax. That will take care of your, you know, they'd sneak the commercials in with the script.
Like it was normal, just
like it was just normal conversation. That's the idea. But I just love stuff like this. This is from the late 30s, somewhere along in there, could be early 40s. In 1954, when you went to your Admiral showroom, here's the all-new TV for 1954. And it shows all kinds of sets in there, explaining the great features of them, Bakelite cabinets, and I mean, just all kinds of early 50s sets. Most of those are not worth a whole lot. But then you reach a point in here, all of a sudden you turn a page and, in case you're interested in a $1,000 TV set, here is an Admiral 15-inch color TV console in a blonde oak cabinet. All it is a one-page cut sheet showing it. This is that TV set right there. We think that they made about 50 of them, and they were made in batches of 10 that we surmise. We're not sure of it, but it makes sense because they were very complicated, and it sold for about $1,000. And in 1953 and for 1954, $1,000, you could just about buy a house for that kind of money.
Right.
This is an RCA Radiola 20. It would be used with a speaker horn or something of a speaker. And it came in several different versions. Zenith, you know, they call it a big dial there. These are very popular today. These were high dollar radios back then. Not many people could afford these back in the late 30s. Very rare, highly desirable. That was a high-end radio back then. And then they came in other many different styles. You have a Sentinel radio here, which was more or less of a chair-side radio with a speaker in it. And it was an AC set that you could plug in. And then we have an Eveready radio here. Same people that make Eveready batteries. And then in style, as far as a cathedral goes, this was manufactured by Crosley, and they call it a Crosley Buddy Boy. And anyway, it was something that like you see in the movies. Getting back to early radio, you had sound effects generators, and this is one, an original, and it makes It could be the rain, the surf, or you can make it as light as you want it, like that, or more violent. It could be the surf. This is out of Chicago. Interesting story behind this. Took me 12 years to buy this. It was at a ham fest up in Ohio, and every year I'd see it up there and I'd want it, and he had some outrageous price on it. And one year finally I said, look, you've had it out here for 12 years, I want it, let's get together on it. Well, we actually did. I got it for a reasonable price. But one of my pride and joys here is this. This thing weighs about 40 pounds here or more. If you recognize it, it is the NBC snake logo. And when I get my building, my real museum finished a little bit, that'll be on the front, my building on NBC. And that'd be kind of neat to have. That's a 74F. That's an RCA radio board. That's from 1948. It's a mono. Yeah, those are very hard to find. This is an RCA TK47, and this is an RCA TK60. This was their last black and white camera that they made. It was mainly for college use, or like student teaching, stuff like that. They used them in TV studios. It's a professional camera. This came from NASA. NASA used to show weather reports, for the Air Force, and if a plane was going to go out on a sortie or something, they need to know what the weather. And then they had a TK45. That was after the TK44. That was an interesting camera. It used Plimicon tubes in it. And another original radio station clock up there that people would pay attention to. And I have various cameras of various descriptions, to include a World War II camera that they used in an aircraft. That was our answer to a Japanese kamikaze.
What is that up there? The pilot?
That's a Pilot 3-inch TV set. Wow. That was the first television set that broke the $100 market. It was $99.95. Huh. It's a 3-inch television set, and it used a lot of surplus tubes in it. It's 1947, 1948. Have little Emerson 7-inch sets. They're all 1949. You've got another RCA or an Emerson. That chassis was an RCA chassis. And then you had a Helicrafters there. That was an interesting set. They had various models of that one. Your usual Admiral. Then you had a Philco 7-inch. Those are Philcos. Then I have another one here. The cover is on it.
Oh,
a Teletone.
Look at that. What in the world is that humongous tube?
That one is a transmitting tube from 1934. It's a German, hand-built. There's some of the little rocket radios that we discussed earlier. I found that up in Chicago.
Rocket radio. Oh, there's the little owl radio from the movie.
Well, no, that one. It's called a Zenith. It's made by Zenith. It's an owl. It's a transistor radio.
But it looks like the owl that was in the
Could
Gods. What was it? It was a movie in the 80s, Claymation, and there was an owl in it, just like that.
Oh, maybe that is it. Here's a microphone. This is a German microphone from World War II, and it's for military radios. I cannot pronounce that exactly, but it's in German, and it means the enemy is listening.
Oh, wow.
This is an original Hammer NBC.
Uh-huh.
Or if you're calling someone to dinner, it's another NBC chime.
Wow.
This is for like a college bookstore. And they're all on chains where some student
Walk away with it?
Walk away with it.
I need this sign for my wife here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. This is all high voltage and you have to be careful. It is now on. That's something, spark gap transmitter.
You're communicating.
SOS. Speaking of spark gap, that's what this is. It's part of your tank coil tuning. This was out of a ship. It was a ship-to-shore spark gap transmitter from about 1910. And what was on the Titanic was very similar to this.
Oh, wow.
Marconi and his transatlantic signal. Here's a 4-channel mic mixer, a Collins thing. These are valuable now. I've got the cover for it. And there's a Russian radio. That's actually from Russia. And I have 3 of those. That is a Howard FM tuner. When FM became available, not all radios had FM in them. And this is from like 1950. And you would hook this up to your radio and you'd tune your radio to a certain place on the AM dial, and then you'd tune this and you could get FM stations that you could listen to FM on your AM radio. Right. You know, those are early imaging devices. If you see that big 4-inch tube right there, that was in that RCA TK60 camera that you saw.
Oh, okay.
Okay, going back a little earlier. Well, there's an image orthicon, that big camera that you saw in the front. That is a large iconoscope tube, and although they were used in early cameras in the late 40s, most of them ended up as part of a film chain, you know, to do 16 millimeter film. And these are CRTs with an English socket on it. Very unusual, but the socket is just huge. And then below it there's a very small CRT that would be used in a camcorder, but it is a CRT. And then you have 3 different styles of Vidicon tubes that were used in cameras. Some of the color would use 3 of those, and the small ones here probably in security devices. And just early television stuff. There's a Panasonic from 1969, and there's different variants of Sony's and small early sets from the mid-1960s when they were doing stuff like that. Motorola clamshell, and then your Sony Watchmans with that real unusual CRT tube in it that was a vertical tube. You know, it wasn't a direct thing, that the gun aims upward on it. And then behind there, those are Philco Safaris from 1959. And there's a piece of original Philco advertising piece that when they had Philco Safaris.
And is that a TV right there?
That is a 3-inch pilot set from 1947.
Wow.
That set broke the $100 barrier in
That's
1947. That's the one. And it was $99.95. And then you get into a JVC, which is a pyramid. Those are highly collectible, hard to find.
Is that a radio alarm clock television?
I believe so. Well, it is an alarm. I believe it is an alarm clock. It could be. And it is AM, FM, I'm sure, and has a TV in it. And when you fold the top down on it, it's kind of loose, have it propped up there, but it folds down that it makes a perfect pyramid.
And is this like a miniature console?
Sort of. In 1969, RCA made a little 9-inch black and white TV set. It was in a, looks to appear to be a console television set, but it is an actual production, and it was meant to be used in your kitchen or something. That set was made in 1969, 1970 for the Christmas season. That's about when they marketed those things. A good friend of mine, his name is Jim. He's up in Indianapolis, Indiana. He sort of designed that set. And 1971, they didn't produce it. In 1972, they thought, well, maybe we should bring that set back. And they had Jim design, and he made 6 prototypes of this. Now, the difference between the two, mainly, this one is an all-tube set. This one is solid state, and he used an AC/DC set, and it has doors on the front that close up. Well, they made 6 prototypes. Well, this is in the day when they were introducing color television and trying to market it XL100. Let's start marketing XL100s and all of that. It did not go in production.
So this is a prototype then?
This is a prototype set. They made 6. 3 were destroyed. 3 of them were forgotten to have been turned
Not
in.
destroyed, yeah.
Not destroyed. And the engineers took them home, and I was able to get this one for my friend Jim. And then I have examples of a Plascon set, and then a little Zenith cube radio. These are highly collectible and are a little hard to find.
That looked like it would have been a higher end tabletop.
It is. It was not a $9.95 set. And then here's an Atwater Kent. This is a very rare set. Here's another Atwater Kent. Those are kind of neat.
Now, is anything curved like that considered tombstone style?
Yes. Anything that's kind of square like this is considered a tombstone, and then anything with a curved top is a cathedral radio.
Cathedral, okay.
They are training sets for a regular All-American 5 radio. And here's another one, a different manufacturer. They made a lot of them. It's pretty much the same thing, and it shows all the tubes, how the filaments are in series. Transmitter control that came out of San Francisco. That is a display for if you sold ever-ready batteries. That's a display unit for the dry cells. That's from the 1920s. Find one of those, will you? That was my first car, a 1956 Cadillac convertible.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
December 17th, 1968.
Look at that. Look at this.
Convertible.
Look at that.
I only look at convertibles.
Yeah.
I've always loved convertibles. Talk about a hobby. I had 26 cars at one time, and about 7 years ago,
You had 26 cars?
I sold them off
Wow.
about 7 or 8 years ago. Yeah, let's go upstairs. Watch your step.
Let's take a
I
look.
can't believe I've done this all by myself.
That's pretty amazing.
There was a broadcast engineer that passed away, and they were chucking all kinds of stuff they were going to throw away. If I didn't rescue those records, they would have thrown them away.
Wow.
Lenses up there for cameras, some of my studio cameras, more lenses, microphone cables, knife switches, big stuff for, I'll tell you who really likes these is people making monster pictures.
Oh, yeah.
You know, big things there like Frankenstein stuff.
Right. So, soldering irons.
Pieces, parts for repair of equipment. All these
Oh,
boxes.
wow.
These are filled with tubes.
Oops.
Do you see the blue rack up against the wall there with the boxes in it right there?
Yeah.
That's all tubes. World War II posters. I love things like that for my military display. You have Jack Benny, Jackie Gleason, Charlie Chaplin, and
Is that Clark Gable?
Clark Gable. Here we go. It's an Oddner calculator. This one, Brunswiga. It'll add, subtract, multiply, and divide on it if you know how to use it, and the carriage shifts. That's another RCA. I have a GE Portacolor. Their second generation from 1967 back there. I saw that in a picture of an estate sale in Chattanooga. And not only that, I didn't realize it had an original Gusdorf cart that it mounts on.
RCA tubes. Look at that. As in color track, RCA. Some Sansui speakers back there.
There's an RCA TK15, and then there's a Sarks Tarsian. I think that's a Sarks Tarsian, a Mark IV studio camera, black and white. It was alongside our TK11 black and whites. This is a 1-inch videotape machine. It is a Sony. It's a BVP 1000. This particular cabinet was made for the NAB convention in Nashville, Tennessee, back in the early 90s, perhaps. And anyway, there's a monitor that goes in there, but I've got monitors that'll go in there, a color monitor. But it's a complete reel-to-reel videotape machine, and it uses 1-inch tape on it.
So this would have broadcast
Yes,
television shows?
it's a broadcast quality tape. This replaced the quad machines, the 2-inch tape.
Okay.
This would take place of it. It was a lot cheaper, a lot easier to operate, and much cheaper to operate. These were made in Chicago, and they were the Sentinel radio and television outfit. And I think many of these were contract marketed, just like this Ward's Airline here. These were all 1948, 49. Atwater Kent breadboard with original tubes in it. Battery set, and this was 1923, not anything later than 1924. And they started marketing radios that had cabinets to it to appeal to the wives. This could hook up to a horn speaker. The speakers were 2000 ohm. It'd be weak unless you had a strong signal there. You could actually hear through a horn. And Atwater Kent made various speakers, you know, horn speakers that would work with it. But mostly people used headphones with it. That down there is an FM transmitter, a 15-watt exciter. That would be used before your final amplifiers. If you had a 10,000 watt station or a 5,000 watt, you need, that is the actual transmitter itself. And when you feed that into the input of an amplifier tube, just the, you know, like a 10,000 watt or a 5,000 watt, that would plug into that, and that would be the primary of your 10,000 watt FM station. This is the control center for a television station. This is about a 1948 model. They use these well into the 60s. And then you have your part on this side, that this is the video part, the visual, and then this is for the audio. Now all transmitters at that time, high-powered transmitters, when they were on the air, that means when the plate voltage was turned on the tubes, and transmitting, there had to be a first-class degreed engineer at the transmitter site. And although they had people that would operate this, there would be an individual here, and he would be watching the video, he'd be watching the VU meters, what's going out. This controlled everything of the transmitters. All of the output was controlled from this console, and if anything needed to be changed, he could do it right here. ER1000 or a 1200, it's a 2-inch, they call them quad machines because it has a quad head on it. And they are pneumatically operated. It has an air supply line for it for a reason, because it doesn't use any electric motors in it because they have a magnetic field which would interfere with the signal on the tape head. So the motor in it is all pneumatic with an air compressor from another source. This is a real 557 Spartan radio.
Not a replica.
That's not a replica. That is the real McCoy. And they're heavy too for what they are.
That is gorgeous. Looks new. I mean, it looks like it's brand new.
It's an excellent condition. And it's hard to find one like that. That's a Heath kit. You had to put that one together.
Television, wow.
Like a 17-inch color TV set.
Loaned by Ed Reeton?
This one was, Ed Rattan was an engineer for CBS. Everything was designed for service. It used image orthicon tubes in it, used 3 of them. This chassis was made that when you undo it, it's made to fold out that you can get to the tubes and replace components on it, but they were designed for service. It's the most expensive artifact that I've ever bought. It's a TK40, not a TK41, although they look identical. RCA made only 25 of these cameras. This one's serial number 8, but they don't call it serial number 8, it's camera 508. They'd always start out things with like 1,000 or something like that. This they started with 500, but it was the 8th one manufactured. This went to CBS in Studio City in the fall of 1953. And the Tournament of Roses and all of their parades, anything in color that they experimented with. Now remember, this is 1953. Very few people had a color TV set back then, but they did broadcast stuff in color for people that did have one. All of these cameras had an intercom system in them, and they used like a Western Electric headset. I was lucky enough to find one, and one thing about Western Electric products, every piece in this is dated, and it's dated all 1953 in it. This is an original with the cloth cord. Anyway, yeah, it's just a period correct relic, and it has a small zoom lens on it, and it has all of the camera lenses that were applicable for this. And it had an RCA tag on it, and it's missing. And it's missing for a reason. It's a CBS camera. CBS hated RCA, but they had to use, if they needed a color camera, there weren't many camera manufacturers that made color TV cameras except RCA. And usually, when they would use an RCA camera, they would paint it blue. And this one back here was one such camera. Now you see the blue on it? I have changed out. This came from another camera. Everything was painted blue on it, and it's an RCA. And this camera was used, still has a WOR property tag in it, that it came from New York City. That's a studio light. I got that in pieces parts. When I was up in Chicago at that producers auction up there, they're all standard. They still use the same things today pretty much. This is Jack Webb's Mitchell movie camera. He purchased 2 of these March 1st, 1958. Every episode of Mark 7 Productions was Jack Webb. And you remember at the end of every dragnet, they had a guy with a hand and a stamp. You go ding, ding. They come back, it was a Roman numeral 7, and it'd say Mark 7 Productions. Every episode of Dragnet, Adam 12, Emergency, and many other Mark 7 productions was made by this very camera. And also, when you're through shooting for the day, and to have a cash flow, you would rent your studio out at night. And there'd be another thing, and it has a Republic Pictures. It says Republic on the front of that. That's a little thing to put a device on it for, it could be a light, it could be a script, it could be a lot of things. But from Republic Pictures, they may have rented this studio at night. That way you keep a cash flow in your studio, so that's how you make extra money and keep your cameras busy. And yet, if anything happened to the camera, they had camera techs right there. It's a real live movie camera. There are camera logs for this camera, and I'm still working on getting them, and they do still exist. A lot of times in your camera logs in a movie thing, okay, we shot scene number so-and-so, so-and-so scene. It was shot this time of day, and it was shot with camera 244. And I've got pictures of this with Jack Webb, and you can see they'd use adhesive tape back then in writing things, and it'd say camera 244. This camera shot a lot of film and a lot of important shows, and I can't wait to get my hands on those camera logs. The other camera manufacturer is Panavision. And the difference between Panavision and Mitchell cameras was that Mitchell sold their cameras. Panavision learned that if you don't sell your stuff, that you rent it, you don't go out of business like Mitchell did. You know, they just kind of went out of business, and everybody had a Mitchell camera. And it uses a similar rake system in it that's similar to the Panavision. Panavision is patterned after a Mitchell camera. A very reliable camera. It's a workhorse. This could be used today to film any full-length feature movie. Panavision doesn't sell anything. They rent it. That if you see a Panavision camera out in the wild, it's possibly stolen or something. But they did sell some stuff. My friend down in South Carolina that had the largest collection of movie cameras, he was in California, and Panavision was getting rid of older camera stuff that they weren't going to use anymore. And they were destroying it, throwing it in a dumpster. And wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Maybe we can make a deal here. Darn if he didn't. He said that they had a tractor trailer load of camera stuff. And he bought it. And I said, well, what did you have to give for something like that? And he said, $50,000. And I said, well, couldn't you have negotiated with him that would $30,000 get it? He says, no, you don't understand. You don't negotiate with these guys. If they said $50,000, you either buy it, or if you try to negotiate, it may make them mad and say, forget it, it's not for sale, and now you've destroyed your sale. And all of that camera stuff that he bought, they put a Panavision camera together, a complete one with everything, that was used in Star Wars 4. And the camera was offered to me, I think, for like $50,000. It could have been more, and it would have been worth it. But anyway, they didn't sell it, and rather recently it went up for auction. It brought $500,000. This is a French telephone, and it has what they call a mother-in-law thing on it. He had a regular handset, but it had an earphone that goes with it, like that. And the mother and like the daughter would be talking to her boyfriend on the phone, or someone that she may date. But the mother-in-law would sit there listening to it, this to make sure that everything you talked about was on the up and up.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have a lot of these. Here's one here with an earphone on an early candlestick, and what I like, the louder they click, the more valuable the dial is.
Really?
This is a fast one, works really good, has an original, here, clack, 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 clack. Or you get an older one. This is like a number 3 dial. You remember the old movies when they'd dial a phone and then sit there and dial and they go. And then I have another German telephone here with a hand crank in it. You crank it. That's like those wall phones, but it's a little more modern when they still had magnetos in them. If you had a telephone in your house, and you know, just a telephone by itself was nothing pretty to really look at, so what you did, you made a cabinet for it. And there's where you would keep your phone. And this table would open up to a little settee, and then there's a little stool that pulls out so you could sit down and talk on the telephone. There's an interesting little radio that's tuned to, what is it, 1330 kilocycles on your AM band, and that's all it'll do. You just have a volume control. You just turn it on, and then there's a regular production radio up there. It has the civil defense markings on it. This is a 1981 Magnavox set. What it really is, it's a Matsushita deck, which is Panasonic. And it is a top loader with click-stop tuning on it. This particular model was made for pretty much everybody. Oh gosh, RCA sold this particular thing. It was, like I said, it's a Matsushita with a Magnavox name on it. GE, Magnavox, RCA sold a whirl of these things, and there were Sylvania. They made a lot of these things. This particular unit, that being that Magnavox was in our backyard here in Knoxville, Tennessee, that was their world headquarters. They put a big splash on at Westtown Mall, and all of the corridors in Westtown Mall were filled with Magnavox products. And it has a plexiglass cover on it that was custom made for this to show the internal working. So this may be a one only, and I was just thrilled to get it.
Wow.
And this is something I like to collect. To answer the question in a broad sense, I cherish all of them. But there are microphones that I have that I really like. Every one of them is a treasure in itself. Because a lot of these microphones, if I started today to try and amass a collection that I have, it's just virtually impossible. Number one, many of them don't exist in the open market, or you're going to pay a fortune for them to try and get them. But some of the microphones that I have a copy of Alexander Graham Bell's microphone. That's this one, that AT&T went to the Smithsonian where his original microphone exists, and they took pictures, they took measurements, and they made exact replicas of Alexander Graham Bell's microphone. Now this is the first microphone that was ever invented. And you've heard the story about how Bell called his cohort up there and said, "Watson, come here, I need you." There's a reason for that. It wasn't because he needed them, it's because what they did, this microphone has a little cup on the bottom with a wire that goes down in it. And there's a voltage applied to it. And that cup contained sulfuric acid. And what he had done was spilled sulfuric acid in some fashion. And when you spill sulfuric acid, like what's in your car battery, you want to get this off of you as fast as possible. "Watson, come here, I need you." And that's how that got started, but that little cup contains sulfuric acid. When you put a voltage on it, the little wire there goes up to a diaphragm, and of course when you speak into a microphone, the diaphragm vibrates. And when you put a voltage across that, and the vibration vibrates that wire, it modulates the electric current that's going through it. And that's how you transmit voice through a wire. And that is the first microphone, actually. And I found that belonging to the Telephone Collectors Society. And he wanted to trade it for something, but cash always talks sometimes. And then you get up to other interesting microphones. Here's a carbon mic. That's kind of an English microphone there that's kind of weird, and I have some weird microphones in there. And I have about every type of microphone manufactured, and everyone has a story in it in itself. I'm just dyed-in-the-wool electronics. Nothing will change me.
All right, well that was Julian Burke. No one can tell a story like Julian. In fact, some of Julian's stories got so long, I had to edit them quite a bit to get them into a quick story versus a novel. He's quite the storyteller, has a tremendous amount of knowledge, and he wants to share it all. And so I had to sort of do a lot of editing to get it into manageable bits there, if you will. Again, this is the longest video I've ever done, so I probably took, in the day I was there, 6 to 8 hours, worth of video that I captured, on that day, and it's had to be something I had to, edit down to a manageable chunk, which is still a good bit of time. But stories, Julian's got them, and he's got the collection and the gear to go along with them to tell those stories. And I certainly gained a lot more appreciation about the people behind the scenes that, put our stories together for television and movies and radio, and never knew all of the different equipment, that people used over the years to tell those stories. And I thought it was quite interesting. So we need guys like Julian, and we have that history that he's captured, and we need to make sure we don't lose that. And so I appreciate him taking the time to tell me a little bit about it and get me an opportunity to then relay that to you as well. So if you're a collector and you've got a story as well, reach out. We'd love to hear it, and maybe we can get it into a future episode. Well, I guess that's it for this week. If you don't want to miss future episodes, better hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you guys for tuning in. See you next time.